Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to the Sackhoff Show. I am your host, Katee Sackhoff. Thank you so much for joining us today for this pretty mind-blowing, out-of-this-world conversation. Before we get to who the guest is, I want to remind you all to stick around for the hindsight, sort of. You'll find out what we're going to do when we get to the hindsight. So stick around for a special announcement where we talk about the episode and everything going on in my life, all that fun stuff. Make sure you send your questions and comments to the sackhoffshow@gmail.com. And I'm just going to get into it because I am so excited. My guest is Ron Moore. Stop. I know. I can't. You guys, I was so nervous for this interview because I have said from the moment I met Ron Moore that if I was a fly on the wall of his brain, I would explode because there's so much in there. He is one of the most extraordinary people that I know. He is so smart, and his writing is extraordinary, and he's just such a wonderful human being. Anyway, I will gush more in the episode and in the hindsight, but if you don't know who Ron Moore is, I honestly don't know why you're here. Star Trek Next Generation, Battlestar Galactica, For All Mankind, Outlander. You guys, there's so much of the last 3 decades have been infiltrated by his mind and his science fiction and his fantasy. And I love him. I want to quickly remind everybody that on March 15th, I am going to be at Indiana Comic-Con with Jeff Porter, and we are doing a live episode. I am so excited with you, the fans. So come join us for the Sackhoff Show live at IndianaComicConvention.com, and I can't wait to see you there. I'm just going to get out of your way, though, because this is such a wonderful episode, and I cannot wait for you to get to know my wonderful friend, Ron Moore, a little bit better. Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. I'm really excited. I'm very nervous. You intimidate the shit out of me.
Come on.
I'm serious. You intimidate the shit out of me. People have always said to me, why are you intimidated by Ron? And I said, because if I was a fly in his head, I would explode. It's too much. It's too much. You're so freaking smart. And it scares the crap out of me. And I've always been so intimidated by you. Because people were like, how much did you talk to Ron when you were filming? And I was like, not. I stayed by myself. I was always like, don't let them see you, because then they'll know you're here.
It's just because I'm quiet, and people read that into me.
I hear quiet.
I hear that from other people.
Do you?
I hear that from just other people outside the business, even, friends or my kids' schoolmates or whatever. Your dad is so quiet. And people read into the quiet like some kind of intimidating presence.
Is it because are you always thinking?
I'm just quiet by nature. Yeah.
Or is it silent in there?
No, I think I am. Yeah. I live in my head a lot, and I am kind of usually thinking or someplace else, but it's never, I seldom use it as a weapon. It's not usually meant to scare people. It's just usually
someone with your brain. You're one of the few. Yeah. So the first question I have is a question. It is, and I'm sure you can guess what it is. I feel like
you were my favorite.
Thank you. I feel like I was your favorite. I stayed out of the way. I get asked one question over and over and over again, and I don't have an answer for people. And they say, why do you not know? And I said, because I never asked. What is Starbuck?
It was a process of trying to figure that out, and I think in the end, I opted to not decide, because every answer that we came up with was unsatisfying to what I thought she was. And what I thought she was something kind of indefinable. Didn't want her to be an angel, didn't want her to be a Jesus figure that had died and been resurrected, but was the part of the unknowable that had come to us and become tangible. Here we are mortals, there's this other thing, there's this presence, there's this other unknowable energy or whatever we're going to call it that in the show was played as the one true God that the Cylons believed in, or the many gods that the colonists believed in. Starbuck had a destiny and was touched by or was created by or had some relationship to this other thing, right? And that's what we talked about in the writer's room. That we used it in sort of those vague terms, and it was in the, we like it. We don't quite know what it is exactly, but it's interesting. And it's interesting to take her on this particular journey. And it's kind of born in the moment of when we did the first Leoben story, you know, with you and the torture, the waterboarding.
Yeah.
When we were writing that and started to get onto this thing, the Leoben, I think one of the first things he says is you're different, or you have a destiny, Starbuck,
You have a destiny
something.
or something like that, right?
And from that moment, it was like, okay, well, that's going somewhere.
Yeah.
And then we didn't want it to dominate the show. We didn't want the show to become all about that, but it was there. So it was like this thing in the background that kept, bubbling up periodically. We knew we wanted to keep playing with it, and we wanted to do something with it. And the concept of God was baked into the show from the miniseries. Number 6 says, God is love, and it takes us on a certain journey. There's moments throughout the series where things happen and you can't explain it by logical, rational means. You know, why, when Baltar says to the president, the Olympic carrier has to go, and her decision to do it, and that allows them to be okay. There's moments that are just not rational that are in the show that can only be ascribed to something else, to some supernatural being or beings or some presence that knows something, has a connection to us. Long story short, at the end, and I was faced with the challenge, how do you define the indefinable? And we debated it a lot. We had a lot of chat in the writer's room towards that last season. What is Starbuck? Is she Gabriel? Is she Jesus? Is she, that's a little too easy. Is she an angel? Is she other analogies we pulled from other religious traditions and theologies on earth? And none of them felt right. It was like every time we gave it a name and every time we said this is what she is, I kind of felt like the mystery was gone and the special quality was gone. And I decided at the end, I'm just not going to say which is, and we're just going to leave the audience with that. And it was sort of, the Sopranos ending is somewhat similar. You just don't answer certain questions and you let the audience wonder. And that's going to be really unsatisfying to some people. And
do you think because the ambiguity of that is sort of, do you think that's unsatisfying for people?
I think for some people it is very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you get the question a lot, because it's people want that answer. And I think looking back on it, I'm not entirely sure that was the right choice. Maybe I should have given it an answer, because it is this weird hanging thing from the show that does come up a lot. And I've gone back and forth in my mind over the last few years about, is that good? Do I like that? Am I enjoying the fact that people still think about it and are still wrestling with it and want to know? Or am I just like, fuck, why didn't I just answer that question? Why didn't I just give it to them so it's not just sticking around? I kind of still feel like I'm glad I did it, because I also just love the moment that you disappear.
I know.
Lee turns around and you're gone. It's one of my favorite moments in that finale.
Yeah.
And there's no goodbye, and it's just like, and then she's gone. And it is like a little bit of a, what was she? She was here and then she's gone.
Yeah. I always looked at that moment, and I loved the moment at the end where she asks him what he's going to do. And as soon as he starts talking about what he's going to do, she knows he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that was her final thing, was just making sure that he was going to be okay.
That he was okay. Yeah.
And then she's gone.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy, I love that you went back to the thing, and I didn't understand it at 25. I didn't get it at all. But now that I'm older, that her biggest fear was being forgotten.
Yeah. Right.
I just as an older person.
Older than 25.
Older than 20, but it gets me now.
Right.
It gets me now. And at the time I didn't have an understanding of life,
Yeah.
And it just I get her now, maybe more than I did at the time, which I think that's what made her so great.
Yeah, because
she also didn't know herself.
And that's not a young person's thought. You're right.
Right.
Will I be forgotten?
Right.
Yeah, and then and that it was a terrifying thing to her on some basic level, the idea that she would be forgotten, but that's not a young person's thought.
No.
And so Starbuck had this, she was starting to think in those terms, in the eternal, and what she leaves behind, when she goes. And it was interesting. She was a character that was edging into this other place, but resisted it and was not a person of faith in that sense, and then has these experiences and keeps feeling the shadow coming and keeps feeling this draw, and then has to kind of grapple with it. It was a fascinating journey to take her on.
What is it about science fiction that you love so much as a vehicle to talk about so many like heavy, like tones, thematic themes, like what is it about sci-fi?
I think it's just that I get permission to do it without having to call anything by its proper name, and I get a pass from the audience. I definitely, that was something that, I learned from Star Trek as a kid, even watching it, starting a dawning realization that these people were talking about something that these aren't really Klingons we're talking about. There's not really a Horta. We're actually talking about something else. And it was interesting, and it got inside me as these characters dealt with it, which is different than if the character's talking about the Soviets or the Russians, and is having that conversation, or what the Republicans are doing, or what the Democrats are doing, or abortion, right or wrong. It's sort of like everything's up front, and you kind of move to your places and your belief system, and what you believe. It's Vulcans and it's Cylons and it's Klingons and it's all this, and it's set on these places far, far away. You can kind of enjoy it and watch it, and yet I'm still speaking to you about this other stuff, and you can take it in a different way, and it sort of gives you permission as the viewer not to get your back up, and not to be all upset because he talked about this stuff, because the show was making you think about certain things in a different way. It's just an interesting. It's an interesting way in, and I always love that about Trek. And when I was working at Trek, it was the same thing. We talked about it all the time. We can talk about all kinds of stuff on the show, and we get a pass. It's science fiction, so there's a big chunk of the audience just isn't taking it seriously anyway, so we're not going to get in trouble.
Right.
Oh my God, they said this on TV last night, but actually, it doesn't matter. It's science fiction. It doesn't count.
Yeah.
So it's a big free pass to really explore and really bend things around the audience and to change the rules. Like when we did on Battlestar, the new Caprica storyline, and we did the suicide bombing.
The suicide bombers?
That was pretty intense stuff. Yep. And suddenly the good guys are the suicide bombers. And I was braced for, okay, we really want to do this, but this is going to be a fight.
Because we were technically on basic cable, right?
Yes. Yeah. We were basic cable. And the fight never came. The network never fought where the politics of that storyline, and what are we saying? What are people going to get upset about? No, it was all about how graphic it is. Oh, how many people are going to get blown up, and how much blood, and all that kind of stuff. But we never had that fight. And it was the same thing. Even the executives running the show weren't engaging with me about what the show was talking about. They let us talk about whatever we wanted. We just got permission to do it all because it wasn't real, and we could hide it.
What was it about the original Battlestar Galactica that you saw a way through to a different story that you wanted to tell with ours?
It was the 9/11 parallel, because I watched, I went back, I had seen the original, in its original run in the 70s and remembered it, but hadn't really seen it since, because it was a one-season show, so it was never syndicated.
Right.
And when David I called me and said, Universal's looking for somebody to take a crack at this, would you be interested? And I went out and went to Blockbuster and got the video of the movie and watched it again. But it was like, January or February of 2002. And walking into it, I wasn't even thinking along those lines about 9/11. But as I was watching it, it was hard not to think about 9/11 in that moment. The apocalyptic attack, the people that are stunned, the world turned upside down, the enemies, they're chasing you into the darkness. And it was all right there. And I realized very quick, like that first weekend, this is an enormous opportunity, because if we do this show now, the audience is bringing all that with them too. So we can talk about what's going on in the world. Again, without having to talk about Al-Qaeda, not having to talk about George Bush, good or bad. We can talk about these deeper themes and these different questions and, liberty versus security and, all those things, terrorism and fundamentalism, and what you would do, in an apocalyptic moment like that. What parts of your civilization would you choose to save? What's important to you? Civilian versus the military control. All of that could be talked about because you had this perfect vehicle to talk about it. And that's what I really got excited about. I thought, this is an enormous opportunity.
You must have written that pilot really fast. Did it just kind of flow out of you?
Well, it was 4 hours, and I was writing it. David and I sold it to Sci-Fi Channel, and they said, okay, we'll order the script. And I'd never written a miniseries, so it was like, oh, it's 4 episodes, it's 4 hours. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna go do that. I got simultaneously with that, I got offered to be a consulting producer on a show for HBO called Carnival.
Right.
So
I didn't realize that was I mean, it was at the same time.
Same time. And so I was splitting my week. And I would drive to their writer's office to work on that show as a consultant half the week. And half the week I had an office in Glendale that I rented. And I sat there by myself with cards and a corkboard, plotting, breaking the Battlestar Galactica miniseries of what it would be. And then from that, I wrote it. And it was, and David was, I would send him drafts and we'd have notes and we would kind of go back and forth about it before we turned it in. But it was a good, I enjoyed writing it. It did kind of flow, it was, I knew the scope and the structure of what it was because, the early decision is where do you end it? Well, you kind of end it more or less where the first hour of the original ends, which is the attack has happened, they're on the run, we're going to go find Earth.
Right.
Like I knew that's the end of the miniseries. That's the end. We're not going to find the casino planet and we're not going to do all that stuff, right? But we're going to end the miniseries on a cliffhanger that has resolved a story. So there's a satisfaction watching the miniseries, but it definitely, David and I always considered it a backdoor pilot. Like the network never said that. They were like, we'll do a miniseries. And maybe there's a show.
I thought it was always considered a backdoor
pilot.
Not
by them. They would never really say that. They would be like, maybe, sure, in theory, if in success, anything's possible.
Yeah.
But David and I were like, okay, we're going to make this as a pilot. So let's be sure we build all the standing sets in the miniseries and let's do this smart as producers so it's ready to go if they do it. But in terms of the writing, I knew that was the end point of the miniseries. And then it was backing up from there. And I had an idea. Then it was all the characters, deciding who the characters were, who I was keeping from the original, who I was losing, what I was changing. And then I knew it was very important to me that the beginning, the first hour or so was just the characters. I just wanted to set up these people and who they were in their lives before Pearl Harbor happens. That's really how I thought of it. And David was the one that would keep me back, like, but there is an attack. Remember, you have to keep the shark in the water, as David. That was one of David's favorite phrases. The Jaws thing. Got to put the shark in the water. Put the shark in the water. Remind the audience the shark is coming. You got to have hints. So, okay, number 6 has to go to the station and, blow up that station at the beginning.
And do all of that stuff.
You got to keep, and he's right. You had to kind of keep that tension going, that something was going to happen. But if you watch the first hour or two, it's really just these characters, their lives, the ship, and then watching, how are they going to dance together or not? And then the attack happens.
You know who each one of those characters is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Within the first meeting of each character.
Yeah. One of the first things I remember having an epiphany about starting the show was the Starbuck jogging sequence.
Really?
That was pivotal because I was trying to figure out how you open the show before the number 6 arrives on the station. Was later. It was David. We put the shark in the water. We need something to open the show with literally a bang. Oh, okay. And then I added that. But the original ending, I was trying to think about how I wanted to open this show, and it was Starbuck jogging through the halls of the Galactica. And along the way, she's going to meet people, and then we'll drop off, and we'll play a scene with them, and then she'll come back around because it's a ship, and she's sort of on a circle. and then we'll pick her up and she'll take us to the next one, and then we'll drop off, and then we'll go around. And I thought, oh, this is cool. It was a great way to introduce the ship and introduce the characters from her point of view.
This episode is brought to you by Masterclass. If you listen to this show, you know that I am obsessed with a good night's sleep. So I was super excited to see sleep expert Matthew Walker has a class all about it on Masterclass. With Masterclass, you get access to over 200 experts who've mastered their craft, sharing everything they've learned to help you level up in your life. It's hands down one of the best ways to learn from people at the top of their game. And I've already picked up so much from some incredible instructors. For just $10 a month, billed annually, you can explore classes on leadership, storytelling, wellness, and so much more at your own pace, which is great. I have been watching some amazing classes lately. Kim Scott's Radical Candor course, love it. It's eye-opening. I've been applying her feedback techniques in both my work and personal life. Halle Berry's class on menopause, honestly, it is a game changer. And there is so much that isn't talked about enough. And she breaks it all down in a way that's both informative and empowering. And I cannot even wait to start Shonda Rhimes' class. The way she builds worlds and characters is next level. And if anyone can teach storytelling, it's her. So if you've been thinking about learning something new, now's the time. Right now, our listeners get 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/Katee. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/Katee. Go to masterclass.com/Katee and start exploring today. When did you decide to make Starbuck and Boomer women, and how did that come about?
Starbuck was first weekend.
Yeah.
Initial viewing. I was, okay, how do I approach this? The 9/11 thing, I get it. I understand that. It's going to be an aircraft carrier in space. I love nautical history and naval history and military history in particular. So that kind of spoke to me. Yeah, I'm really going to play this like an aircraft carrier. Like it's going to be an aircraft carrier. And then I started thinking about the characters. And the first thing that hit me was that I really forgotten until I watched the show again, was Adama's not the lead character. You know, the original is about Apollo and Starbuck. They're front and center. It's really, they are the stars of the show. I was like, oh, right. It's really about these two. Oh, and it's the straight arrow, good son of the commander and his roguish, cigar-smoking, girl-chasing friend who's the hottest pilot in the fleet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do with that. I was like trying to figure out I've seen this so many times. This is such an old chestnut. What can I do with it? And it just sort of occurred to me, well, what if Starbuck was a woman? And it just all clicked. And it was like, oh, I haven't seen that. That's different. Because in that point, women in fighter planes and in combat in general was still a relatively new idea. And it was happening, but it wasn't common. And it was just kind of very new. And I hadn't seen it really portrayed. And I immediately started thinking, that's really interesting. And I certainly haven't seen the female version of that. Of the cigar smoking, devil may care, gambler will throw the first punch. Who's that? And I was immediately interested in her. Like, well, that's a damaged person. She's interesting. She's got a backstory. He has a different backstory. Then you start getting into, well, who's the good son? What does that mean? And what does it mean to even be a good son? What does it mean to be the good son who's friends with her? Okay, now where are we going? And then, oh, that's right. I'm watching the miniseries and he's got the dead brother, right? And then I started feeling like, well, I don't want to play Apollo and Starbuck as a couple. Maybe the show gets there someday, but that's not really what the show is about. Like, I almost had to wipe that off the board for the audience, because otherwise they'll just assume, and these two are in love. So then it became, what if she was actually involved in his brother? Oh, there's a tragedy. And the show kills him in the pilot. Right. He dies on camera. But I thought it was more interesting to reveal that actually this is a wound. These two haven't seen each other in a while. And so I started just kind of embroidering the relationships between them and the dead brother, and then connecting it to Adama as like a little relationship tree before I really even had the story, like how I was going to how any of them played into the story, what they did in the story. But Starbuck and then the family Adama kind of became where it all began in terms of the characters. But that moment of what if Starbuck's a woman, it flipped her and it made her clear in my head, and it opened up other. Then I started just thinking about, well, okay, wait a minute, who else and what else can we do? Well, I need a president because that's what I want to play. I want to play the civilian military. Why not make the president a woman? Let's do that too, you know? And then you're almost like, who else can be?
Who else is a woman?
Let's flip over some more cards, you know? And Boomer was just like along the way, you're going through the various characters. Well, Boomer, what can I do with that? That's interesting. And, you know, at the beginning, Boomer was paired with Tyrrell because I thought that was going to be sort of a family unit. Like they were the forbidden love. And that's why Boxy came aboard.
Right.
Because I thought, oh, it's going to be these three are going to form a new family relationship over here. But that was part of the rationale for why she was a woman too.
Did you intend for Starbuck to always be such a badass?
Yeah.
That was always the intention.
It was very important to me. I was like, I didn't want her to be a fun, she's just kind of, but she means well, you know, that she's not. That's why in that first scene at the poker table, she was going to hit Ty. She wasn't going to screw around. She was going to come across that table and hit him and mean it. And like, she was someone who courted problems. You know, she wasn't, there's nothing safe about her. I kept saying, there's nothing safe about Starbuck. She's a hell of a pilot, best pilot in the fleet, loyal friend, you know, do anything for you. But don't fuck with her, man. You don't want to fuck with this. And she could just go off too. There's a dangerous quality to her.
Do you remember the audition processes at all? And like, I always wonder, like when I got the script, I knew, because up till that point, I had played just stereotypical blonde roles. And I was like, this is just awful. And I remember getting the miniseries and thinking to myself, if I can book this character, my life will never be the same. They're not going to make me play these ditzy blondes anymore. They're not going to ask me to take my shirt. Well, they might ask me to take my shirt off. It's network.
It's not get crazy. It's not get crazy.
And I remember just thinking, I have to convince them I'm right for this. I have to. Because on paper, people were like, you're not right for this.
Really?
Yeah. That's what I heard multiple times. And I don't know why Eric Dawson, Kripke, Dawson, and Ulrich.
Sounds right.
That was the casting directors. They kept having me come back. But what was it about, I guess, what was it about me at that time that made you see Starbuck?
Can't help you with that one because I really was, at that point, by the time the show started really getting produced, then they had asked me to be the showrunner on Carnival. So I took over Carnival. So David then was producing it. And so I didn't really see, I'm sure he sent me casting tapes, but I really was not weighing in on any of that. The only two cast members I had any direct input on were Eddie and Mary. Yeah. Because I wrote the show for Mary, and
did you really?
Yeah, you know that?
I did not know that.
I wrote the show for Mary because I was while I was writing the miniseries, a friend of mine said, "Have you seen Donnie Darko?" I said, "No." He said, "Oh my God, you've got to see this movie." So I got the disc or the tape or whatever it was, and I watched it during this period. And as I was watching Mary's performance, I was like, she's Laura. Oh my God, she'd be the perfect Laura. So then from then on, when I was writing that character, it was with her in my head and her voice. Yeah. And I could see her in the scene. So I wrote the role for her. And then you hope, you know, it's like you always have these crazy lists of people you're going to get. Yeah. And she was, I wanted her at the top, not really thinking we were going to get her. And lo and behold. And then we had a brunch with her. David and I had brunch with her. And it was like, oh my God. And Eddie was, Eddie wasn't in my head as solidly as that, but he was David and I's first choice. It was still like, Edward James Olmos. Yeah, right. Like that's going to happen. Okay, let's keep filling out the pages, but this is the dream one. Yeah. And then David called one day when I was at Carnival. I said, Edward James Olmos wants to meet. Can you be there? I was like, yeah, I'll be there just for this fucking meeting. Are you kidding? Just to do the meeting, I'm going.
I know.
So this is This is such a great little story.
No, it's fantastic.
And I've told this
and Eddie
before.
is full of stories. So
Eddie is full of stories. I meet in David's office, as I recall, at the Universal lot. And he's Eddie, and he's like, hey, he's giving you very little at first, but he's like, the script, it's really, really love it. It's really special. It's amazing. It's just all these things. And he says the whole thing about, but if there's any aliens, if there's a green-headed monster, I'm just going to walk off the stage. And we kind of go, yeah, okay, well, it's not sure. But the thing he said was, reminds me of Blade Runner. I'm like, oh, well, that's cool.
Okay.
I'm cool. I'm digging that. And he says, I remember we were doing Blade Runner. And I suggested to Ridley that we should do some Japanese things with ramen, and the language should be part of the show, and the Asian culture would have permeated Los Angeles by that point in the future, and we should do that. And I remember so clearly sitting across from him like this and thinking, okay, you're that guy. You are going to take credit for one of the great things in science fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to remember that you're that guy, and just file that away, right? Literally years go by, and I was at home. We're now well into production on the show by a couple of seasons, and I had the box set of Blade Runner with all the different cuts and all the behind-the-scenes stuff, and I'm watching an interview with Ridley Scott, and sure as shit, he's like, and I remember when Edward James Olmos mentioned to me the idea of having like Asian culture in the show. And I was like, oh my God. And he really did that.
He really
did that. And Ridley credited, just said, yeah, it was Eddie's idea. And that's where it came from. And that's why we did it. It is. It's amazing. And it was like, wow. So
that influenced so much.
Oh, yeah. So much.
Eddie's crazy. He has his finger on the pulse of Los Angeles. Unlike anyone I've ever met.
Yeah.
He just like feels this city in his bones.
Yeah, he really does.
And he just has such a great eye for things like that.
Yeah.
It's really impressive. How did you end up at Star Trek, at Next Gen?
Sold my first professional script to them. I was I was a kid growing up. I was a Star Trek fan.
Because you were like 25, right? You were like really young on
25, that. 25, yeah. I was. I grew up as a Star Trek fan. It was a fundamental part of who I was, to a point that's hard to explain to people that don't grow up as fans or nerds, in certain environments. That I breathed it in. I drank it. It was just incredibly important to me. I read everything I could. I grew up in this little town in Central California. And there was this thing that came on television every day after school that I just watched over and over again and loved it. But I didn't really think I was ever going to be a writer. And that was a dream that nobody in my hometown wanted to be a writer. That wasn't a real job. So long story short, I bombed out of college where I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
You bombed out of college?
I flunked out of college.
You did not graduate from college? I don't know why I'm saying this. Like, it's not. I did
not.
I just assumed that you
one semester short.
Graduated like summa cum laude and
I had trouble. My senior year, I just stopped going to class and partied all night and hung out with my friends and slept all day. And you do that long enough, eventually they come to you and say, you're not really in school here anyway. You should probably not be.
You should probably save your money.
Oh, so they invited me to leave. And so
they invited
me to leave. And I took them up on the invitation.
Were your parents like, what are you doing?
They were appalled. They didn't know, because in those days you could hide such things for your parents for a while. Didn't even tell them I was at school.
Just racing home and deleting the message on the answer machine?
No, I wasn't even at home. I was still at college, living in the fraternity house. It was a Kappa Alpha Society.
You were a frat boy?
I was in the Kappa Alpha Literary Society. It was a nerdy literary society where we were all writers. And that's why I joined, because I was a writer. I wanted to be a writer. And there was a fraternity that were about writers. And so we were all the writers.
Was it like Dead Poet Society?
A little bit.
Now I'm just imagining you like standing on chairs, like saying, my captain, oh my captain.
No, we didn't do that, but we did have to write, at your monthly meetings and our meetings, you had to like bring something you had written and read it in front of everybody. Okay. So it was that kind of an organization.
All right.
So I was still living there after I got kicked out and just hiding out. A friend of mine had graduated the year before, who was an actual film student, was living in Los Angeles, came back for a visit. And we hung out for the long weekend, and he was like, so what are you going to do exactly? I was like, I really don't know, because everything had fallen apart. You know, I wasn't going in the Navy anymore. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I wasn't in school. There was
But you wanted to go in the Navy too?
I was there on a Navy scholarship. I was there on a Navy ROTC scholarship. That's how I was going to Cornell. And when you flunk out, you lose a scholarship. The whole thing just collapsed.
I just love that you flunked out of Cornell.
I did. I flunked out of Cornell with 1 semester to go.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Oh, it haunts me. Trust me.
Do you think your life would have been different if you'd graduated?
Fundamentally.
Yeah.
Fundamentally. I mean, yes, I look back now, it's the thing that, oh my God, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's that lesson of, well, you know, at the moment, these things seem like disasters. And then with the passage of time, and you look back and you're like, well, if that had not happened, life would have gone down a very different path.
Yeah.
Because if not for that, this wouldn't have happened. Eric came back, said, why don't you come back to California with me tomorrow and be a writer? You know, like
you
me.
wouldn't have been able to do that.
And I said, okay, and bought a one-way ticket to LA and started sleeping on his floor in his Studio City apartment, in his studio apartment, and started over. And was like, I'm going to learn how to be a writer. And I'd never taken a film class, and I didn't know how to write a script, but I like to write, and I'd always written. And okay, I'm going to start. So walked down Ventura Boulevard and get a job at Studio City Animal Hospital, and became a messenger and did contract administration and personnel for different companies. And for about 3 years, a very short amount of time that in my memory was like 2 decades. It felt like a long time of not knowing what I was doing, feeling like I had thrown my life away and I was a complete failure. And, you know, my parents were deeply unhappy. And, you know, I was unhappy. And what does it mean? I'm not even sure what I'm trying to do here. I'm going to be a writer. I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody in this business. One day, started dating this girl, and she saw that I was a Star Trek fan because I had Captain Kirk posters in my apartment, because that's what I did. I still loved the show. I was still a Trekkie. I was very proud of it. I loved Star Trek, chapter and verse. And she saw the posters. She's like, well, you know, I know people on Next Generation, which was in its 2nd season at that point. I was like, what? Really? She said, yeah, I mean, you know, there's a set tour. I could get you on a tour of the sets. What do you mean? And so many people in LA wanted to go visit the Star Trek sets because they were shot at the Paramount lot. The production finally went, all right, we're going to do this once a week.
Okay.
We'll have one set tour. And if you know somebody who knows somebody to get on the list, okay, we will take people down, visitors, to the Star Trek set 1 day a week. And she said, I could probably get you on that list. Oh, please, 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 please get me on the list. Okay, she makes the call. She says, okay, I got you on the list, and it's in about 6 weeks. And I said, great, oh my God. And for whatever reason, because I really wasn't the guy that was always leaving scripts on people's doors, and I wasn't the go-getter, I was kind of half-assing it a lot. I'd start a script, I'd walk away, I'd get bored, I'd sort of completed scripts, try to get an agent, but I'm going to the movies this weekend. It was like that. For whatever reason, at that point, I decided this was my shot. This is my opportunity. I wrote a script, sat down, wrote an episode of The Next Generation, and took it with me on the set tour, and managed to convince the guy that was giving me the tour to read the script. Didn't want to. He'd heard this many times, but it made him laugh. I knew a lot about Star Trek.
Who was the guy giving you the tour?
His name was Richard Arnold, and he turned out to be one of Gene Roddenberry's assistants, which I didn't really know. He was just the guy who gave the tour. And he finally was like, okay, kid, all right, okay, I'll try it. I'll give it a read. So he reads it, and he likes it. And he gave it to this woman who became my first agent, because he knew her through, I remember, some connection. She was a very she was a very young agent too, trying to get in the business or something. And submits it to the show, goes into what was called the slush pile. They had a box of unsolicited scripts that sat in the production offices. 7 months pass. New executive producer, Michael Piller, came aboard to run the writing staff of Next Generation in the 3rd season. Desperate for material, starts going through the slush pile, finds my script, buys it, produces it, asks me to do a second one as a freelancer, do a second one. Then I get this call like 3 or 4 weeks later, Ron, it's Michael, okay, I just fired a writer. Can you come down and be on staff tomorrow? Yes. showed up, and I was there for the next 10 years. And it was just like an unbelievable Cinderella miracle of things. I was ready for it in the sense I didn't realize I'd been preparing to write for Star Trek my
Your
whole life, but I had.
Yeah.
And I knew what that show was about. I knew what Star Trek meant. I knew the style of it. I understood the characters. And I took my shot, and right place, right time. They were looking for a script like mine. He was looking for new people. He was desperate to have somebody on staff, and he gave me an opportunity. And that's how I got in, and that's how I stayed there.
How did you teach yourself to write scripts?
Once I was there? Or you
No,
mean,
before.
Oh.
When you moved to LA.
It was going to places that sold scripts. There were like Samuel French, I think was a bookstore that would sell scripts. And so you could buy them in LA and in Hollywood and just read and see what the format was like. And I'd seen some Star Trek original series scripts growing up. I think I'd even had some copies I had bought at a convention or something. So I'd seen a script and sort of understood the basic format. And then the rest was just, okay, I guess this is how they do it. The margins are like this.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is, it's exterior and put day or night. And I kind of cobbled together the basic nuts and bolts of how to do it. And then just started trying it. And I don't know, I think it was mostly because I understood, again, Trek. I understood the format of the show. I understood that the teaser had to do this. I understood that by the fourth act, this sort of always happened in the episodes, and that each act break had to go out on a moment of jeopardy. And I kind of knew that the show was always about the captain. I always knew that I knew certain things about that particular show that turned out to be basics of writing, that were basics of story structure, that were basics of character, that I hadn't even thought about it that way. I'd never taken a course of any of that. So it was very self-taught, but I had this model, this format that I knew cold, that I could kind of like crib from. You're like, oh yeah, well, this is kind of how we do this, and this is kind of how you construct a story. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And when I got on staff, it was like, okay, now you're in it.
Yeah.
Now catch up.
Do they, when you're in staff like that, are the other writers helpful?
They were enormously helpful. And it's a large part of my success goes to that first staff, because they didn't have any reason to be nice to me or to help me. I was the kid that was replacing someone they kind of liked who got fired. Yeah. And I showed up the next day. And they had met me because I had sold those previous two scripts, and I'd been around. And so we kind of knew each other. But now I was one of them and had zero experience. And they all had decades, like literally between them, they had decades of television experience. Very much more veteran writers than I were. Mm-hmm. But from day one, I sat in that writer's room with them, and they just accepted me. No question. It was like I could say anything I wanted. What if it's this, or I don't like that? And they listened, and they just did it. It was just like, okay, he's one of us. Without saying, we're going to do this, or this is what we're going to teach you, kid, or anything. It was just like, I was just a writer in the room, and they treated me like that, and so I just acted like that. And I didn't realize at the time what an enormous thing that was. And now I can look back and go, wow, those guys could have froze me out. Those guys didn't have to talk to me. They could have made sure I got fired too. And they didn't. They just welcomed me in like I was one of them. I was one of the band of brothers and sisters, atmosphere of that show. And it meant everything. It was us against the world. Yeah. The show was in turmoil. The early seasons of that show were epically,
really?
in turmoil. And
I loved that show growing up.
The first two seasons in particular, before I got there was so much bad blood interior and behind the scenes.
With the writing or the cast, or
no, it was Gene was still alive. Gene would throw out scripts and fire writers and hire other ones, and writers would backbite each other, and a lot of inner turmoil and division about what the show is, what the show's not, and just a lot of angst and anger and people coming and going. And the people that I joined third season, a couple of them were veterans from the previous year.
Oh, gosh.
And they were like the cynics of, it's all good until it all blows up, kid. It was just like, okay, here we go. But you were also in this hand-to-mouth thing of we were never caught up. We were never more than one script ahead. We were like prepping outlines and prepping beat sheets.
Jonathan Frakes said that, how he would get scripts the day before and
Day
be
before,
like, what?
day of.
Yeah.
So you were just in the writer's room and writing, you just had to move fast. You were trying desperately to get pages out the door. And so I think part of their welcoming to me was of necessity. Like, we need a body. Can you write? Go write this scene.
Right.
And you would just write and turn it in. Do it again. And it built this muscle memory of being able to write fast and do it today. It has to be here tomorrow. Something's shooting. It has to be done. And you had can't have writer's block, can't have fear. You just put some on that page and turn it in. And that was the atmosphere of that first season. So it was like really it was a crucible, but I loved it. I was just like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever.
What was it about Star Trek that you loved so much?
It starts. It came on top of, I was already in love with space. I saw Neil Armstrong land on the moon as a child, as like 5 years old, and that was like a moment of like spaceships and a guy and a thing. There's a guy on the moon.
So that was that moment?
That was that moment. And from that point, I started anything on TV that had anything to do with rockets and spaceships, I would watch. So I watched the Apollo landings and the launches and all that as a little kid. And then anything else that has spaceships. And then Lost in Space is like my new favorite show. And then somewhere around third grade, fourth grade, I discovered Star Trek, which was a better space show. And it just started to dawn on me that this was a special show. And I really wanted to be Captain Kirk. And I wanted to have friends like Spock and McCoy. And it was teaching me things. And I was learning things. And I was learning things about ethics, politics, things that mattered, honor. I idolized that captain because I wanted to be like that captain. That meant something to me as a little kid. He was Ira Bear, who was a writer at Trek. He was like the head of the writer's room when I started there. He once said that, Shatner's version of Captain Kirk was a little boy's idea of a captain. But it's such a good idea of the perfect captain, of that guy, that the crew follows into hell, has a sense of humor, but he can be tough, always gets the girl, always knows the right thing to do, and always does the right thing. And so that spoke to me as a kid. And as I got older and kept reading Star Trek novels and behind the scenes stuff and watching and over again, starting to appreciate so much about it, this universe that was created, that was consistent, that made sense. The Federation had an idea. There was a Starfleet. There were these planets. I mean, it was like a literal, like, I think it's akin to people that fell in love with Tolkien,
Right.
in a different way. It's not nearly as complex as Tolkien, I get that, but it was a universe that you could lose yourself in, and a universe you wanted to be in. And if I could be someplace, I wanted to be in that universe. I wanted to be into that future. And it was a positive future.
Yeah.
It was a future that said, unlike many things in science fiction, it's going to be okay.
It was very idyllic.
It's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's going to be all right. We're going to solve poverty. We're going to solve racism. We're going to stop war. It's going to be a better tomorrow.
Do you ever think about writing more Star Trek?
Oh, yeah. There was a point I had to get away. I was there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it was a long time. And there was a point where it was like, I can't even watch it anymore. I have to, I've lived in that world so much. And it was 26 episodes a year. It was like a lot. Had to get some distance from it. And then time passes and I could start enjoying it sort of as a fan again. And then you start thinking, wouldn't it be nice to go back and do it? And at first, no, but I've done it. I've done it. Why go back? And there's still a part of me, though. It's a big universe and it's a big idea. What would I do in it?
Yeah.
And periodically I think about that, and I don't have a direct answer. I've never had and this is what I would do with Star Trek. But it would be fun to do it again. It'd be fun to be interior bridge of the Enterprise. That's appealing to me.
What other things influenced your writing as you were growing up? Still influence you?
I was very much a child of television and growing up in the 70s. And syndicated television that was repeating all the shows from the 60s and then what was on primetime. I just loved television. So all those shows were kind of influential, but MASH was certainly a big early influence on me as a kid, startling. A show that was a comedy that was also doing these tragedies.
Yeah.
And bloody things would happen and characters would die. You know, they were Henry Blake was just like who Henry Blake is in that show.
Yeah.
When Henry Blake died, I was shocked.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, they don't really mean this. They're gonna find him floating in a lifeboat next week. You know, it's like they can't really do that. And that they didn't was like, wow, holy cow. That moment always stuck with me.
It always amazed me that they were having comedic moments over the top of patients.
Yeah.
I was always like, is this must be what it's like?
Yeah. It was a
like comedy and
show.
tragedy are so close to each other.
Yeah. It was an amazing show. That was a big influence. And then, other side, Star Wars was a huge thing. I loved Star Wars when that came out.
Did you write a Star Wars script?
You mean eventually?
No, I mean, like, rumor has it that you were developing Star Wars at some point.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What happened to that?
Yes, there was a point in Galactica was winding down. Caprica was starting. Right around that period, I got a call that George Lucas wants to meet with you about a possible series. What? Huh? Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Again,
just for the meeting.
Just for the meeting. I'm there. So meet with George. He was very nice, and his producer Rick McCallum. And turned out at that point, George wanted to do a live action Star Wars TV series. And this is after he had done the prequels, but clearly before any of the other movies and stuff. And it was like, wow. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to gather a group of writers together, kind of an international group of writers. So I was one of the Americans, and there were some from the UK and from Australia and New Zealand, and he would bring us together up at Skywalker Ranch for like a long weekend.
Isn't it amazing? I've only been one time, and I wanted to like stow away.
Yeah.
And like stay forever.
I know. Did you get the tour of like the archives and all that?
I did. Jon Favreau gave me arranged the tour, and I disappeared. I went for Dave Filoni's birthday, and John, because I don't do well in parties, and I think John knows that. And so I wanted a tour. And so I left the party with John and Paul Sun-Hyun Lee, and we got a tour of the entire, it was amazing.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's like, there's the Lost Ark of the Covenant. It's like right there.
It was absolutely amazing.
It was amazing. So we would go for these long weekends or a week or something at a time, sit with George in a conference room at the Skywalker Ranch and break these stories. And then we would go off for like another 6 weeks up by ourselves, write the scripts, then regather, talk about notes, do another group of scripts. And this went on for like a year or two or something. Yeah. We would just gather, break up. And the writers would kind of change. Not everybody could go to every session. New people came out. I didn't go to all the sessions. And we wrote something like, I think 48 or 50 episodes. Oh yeah, there's like 48 or at least it's definitely in the 40s. I think 48 or 50 scripts for this series. And when we got to that point, George said, okay, that's enough. And then he wanted to just take those scripts and he was just going to go shoot them on his dime, which is kind of what he had done with Clone Wars, the TV show.
Right.
Like he was just going to produce this series. And in George's mind, it was, once I've produced it, I'm just going to then take it to a network and go, take it or leave it. This is what it is. I don't care what your notes are. I don't care what your thoughts are. It is done. Do you want it? And they would have no choice but just to say, yes, Mr. Lucas, here's your check. That's where we left it with him. And he went off, and I think he did they shot some test footage because he was, George loves technology and he was exploring different things of CGI and what became the volume and all that stuff was percolating at ILM. Shot some test stuff for some scenes, but not too long after that, like another year maybe goes by, and he sold the whole thing kit and caboodle to Disney, all Lucasfilm. And so the
Yeah.
project never happened. And that's what happened. I wrote, I think, 2 of those scripts.
Really?
Yeah. It was amazing. It was an amazing, sitting in a room with George Lucas
I know.
and arguing about Star Wars.
Arguing about Star Wars?
Oh, yeah, because as a writer, at a certain point, you get over your awe, and now you're just in a writer's room, and he's telling you something about Darth Vader that doesn't make sense. You're like, I don't think that's really who Darth Vader is. Let me tell you about Darth Vader. He's actually, and George, I don't think that's, Darth Vader. And like, yeah, but George, he wouldn't do this. You're just like,
oh my gosh,
what am I doing? Where am I?
But that's amazing.
Yeah, you just got to forget. And now you're just in a story conference having an argument,
So that's crazy. That's crazy. Where did you, so I know after Battlestar, you did a pilot with some of the cast. And then the next big thing that you did was Outlander. What did that come to you? Did you read the novels? What was it about that world? Because it seems sort of not in the science fiction realm, but there is a magical element to it.
It came to me through my wife, Terry, and Meryl Davis, who used to be my assistant back in the Battlestar days,
yes,
then became like my producing partner. And towards the end of Battlestar, or maybe it was during Caprica, the 3 of us were having dinner in Vancouver somewhere, and we were talking about projects and what could happen next, and what would be fun. And one of them mentioned Outlander, and the other one was like, what? I love Outlander. And they were huge fans of the books. And the 2 of them are having this whole conversation about, and remember when Jamie did this? And what about Claire? And I love that part. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, Ron, you've got to read this. And they both agreed, you will like this. This is great. Strong female lead is really interesting. You like period, because I love history.
Mm-hmm.
It's a period piece. It's Scotland. It has a little time travel in it. Yeah, I think it's really appealing. You should take a look. So then I sat down and read the first book. And I read the first book as a piece of material. I've always made this distinction. My experience with reading Outlander was not as just a reader, where I could just read it, and
right,
enjoy it. This was towards a purpose. So I was reading with an analytical eye of, okay, how does this become a show?
Right.
And right from the beginning, on that first read, I was like, oh, I totally see it. I get the show. Like, this book is the first season of the show, and here's where the pilot's going to end, and this part I'm probably not going to do, and this part needs some work, but here's the structure. I see the structure of the television show. And I was like, okay, I'm in. Let's go get the rights. And then that took time. Then it was, the rights are not available. Then Meryl would call periodically, 6 months to a year, every once in a while, check back in on I kind of forget about it, but she's like a dog with a bone with this. And eventually the rights were available, and that's when it all kind of was able to happen.
There is like such a sexual, it's such a sexual show. I think when I first watched Outlander, that was like the thing that I was like, oh, this is very sexy. This is like really, is that, does that come naturally to you? Or do you have to like, some of those sex scenes, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Is that just something where you're like, it's also there, or?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that. Because when I got to, step back a little, when I got to Battlestar, when I did the miniseries, I was really frustrated by sort of the chaste quality of not just Star Trek, but generally sci-fi in general. It's like these people in these universes don't have real mature, actual sexual relationships.
Right.
We have a lot of, I remember I said this in a pit, and I was like, there's a lot of women in latex and spandex. We'll fetishize sex, but we don't actually have sex. It's not actually a mature thing. So in the miniseries, Baltar and, number 6, right up front, this is part of the show. These are real people. They're sexual beings. They have these relationships. So I put it in the show. Like this is part of who we are, like of a definition of what the show was. Outlander, then, all of that is in the books. The books have a lot of sexual content in them, eroticism. It's part of that world, a part of what Diana brought to that. I had a certain discomfort with, okay, but this is, how much of this am I doing? And I don't want this to be voyeuristic. And yet it is part of this show. And it's already built into the material. So now I'm like, okay, how am I going to dramatize some of this? How much do I want to see and in what context? And I always wanted the sex to me have a meaning. Why are we showing this one? Why are we not cutting away on this one? What does this one mean for the characters? And it was something I really had to kind of sort through in my head as I was writing it, and especially as we were producing it, and then in editing, especially sitting in the editing room and trying to decide what to see, what not to see, how long am I here, how long am I not, why am I doing this, why are we doing this? And there was no guide to take me through it other than just my gut of what I thought was too much or what I thought was not enough. And I just tried to go with that. And then after the first season, I found myself kind of being the one that would go, I don't know if we need to see the sex again, because I kind of felt like we'd done that. And so then it would be, oh, come on. I mean, this is part of the fans, this is part of the story. And I wasn't the curmudgeon in the room, but I was sort of like, yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. But why are we really doing it this week? And I would force everybody to talk about, why this one? What is this scene about? Why are we going to dramatize this particular one? And as long as they could answer that question and it made sense, then it was all right. Yes, okay, then let's go do it. But it was an interesting struggle. It was different.
There was a YA story with fairies at some point that you had the. Whatever happened to that?
Yeah, of Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yes.
ACOTAR, yeah.
Yeah.
Book series, hugely popular fantasy book series. I think Meryl found it, I want to say, or maybe it was already on Disney's radar. I don't remember chicken and egg of it all.
Yeah.
Landed it, talked with the author, brought it to Disney, went into development, but it just never got off the ground. It's just that simple. I was at Disney, for 4 years, and we just, it's a time of turmoil, a lot of reasons why, between COVID and strikes and all kinds of stuff, but nothing ever got traction, and that was one of them. And it's, as far as I know, it's still, by the time I left, it was still in development, and there's really no other answer than that. It just never came together.
What, now I just have like little stories, because I don't have time to like go into your entire life, Ron, and I want to. But have you ever written something that was like so ridiculous and so like silly? Because science fiction sometimes can be silly, that you were like, I can't make somebody say this.
Oh, like a
dialogue, like a line of dialogue where you were like, they can't. This is mean. Because I can tell you, did you write?
This is a good lead up to this. Okay.
We've got violent decompressions are radiating from the port flight pod.
I don't think I did.
I can't get it out of my head. It has been in my head since like...
What is that from? Is that
the
from...
miniseries?
Oh, if it's in the mini, then I wrote it, yeah.
I thought I was going to get fired.
Oh, you're in the Viper looking? And looking out the window,
so.
You have violent decompressions all along the fight. Yes, I did write that.
And I remember I couldn't say it. And I was like, they're going to find me out.
It's just too much.
They're going to find me out. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the plane in my helmet. And I remember thinking to myself, everyone's staring at me. I'm in a fucking glass bubble right now.
Oh my God.
And I can't get it out of my mind. What am I going to do? And so I asked Reimer, I said, can you please give me the sides and a piece of tape? And he went, yes. And I taped it in front of me. And I did it. But now I can't fucking forget it. I can't forget it. But so is there anything that you've written where you were like, I can't make them say this? And you made them say this?
There were, I know the line that I wrote that I suddenly was embarrassed I'd made them say. That first season on Trek, Sins of the Father was the episode. It's a Worf story. Worf goes back to his home world for the first time and has this whole thing about his honor. And I was down on the set, And I'm digging it. I was like, I wrote it was a big Klingon show. Like, this is kind of cool. We're doing this whole thing. There's Michael Dorn, and he has this line in a scene where he discovers one of the other Klingons has betrayed them. And the line is, someone should feed this hotebot to the dogs. Right? And so, action. Someone should feed this hotebot to the dogs. Cut. And Michael immediately goes, you know what? It's a great script, but then somebody writes you a line of dialogue like that, and the whole thing is just so stupid. And he didn't see me, and I was like off camera, I was like, oh, that is a really bad line.
Oh, no.
And I slunk off the stage, and I was like, oh man, that was bad. So I did that. God. But the what you're talking about, Trek kind of probably gave me bad muscles about stuff like that, because that's sort of a classic technobabble line.
Yeah.
And we did so much technobabble on Star Trek where, poor Data or somebody has to, Captain, the warp core, asymmetrical unit is fritzing off I mean, I can't even say it, but there would just be these lines of almost indecipherable nonsense tech that characters had to say, with a straight face, that there was real science. And we just did it all the time. So I didn't even bat an eye when I wrote that line for you. It was just,
I think I've gotten so good at like scientific, I call it mumbo jumbo, because I don't know what it means. I mean, I try to make it make sense.
Yeah.
Because then
you have to sell it.
Because then I at least try to kind of understand it in my head. But some of the lines, like there were doozies on Star Wars where I was like, somebody I don't know how I'm going to get through this one.
And and it was a crutch at Star Trek, to be honest. There were times when there were certain scenes were more just about rhythm than anything else. And you'd get into a scene, you're on the bridge and there's a crisis going on, and Picard says, Mr. Data, can you tech the tech? And I would write the word tech. The writer, you could just put the word tech in it.
And then they'd figure it out.
And they'd figure it out later. But then you have this page of dialogue as a writer that's like, Mr. Data, can you tech the tech on the warp drive? Captain, there's a theory that if we teched the outer part of the tech, it might actually work. Geordi, but Data, if you tech the tech too high, the tech will explode. Riker, we shouldn't try to tech the Captain. Well, I think we're going to try. Mr. Data, tech the tech. Because it's really just all about the rhythm of that scene, really.
I want to see the entire episode of just them saying tech.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to see that.
Happened all the time.
Oh, my God. I love that. What are you hoping to, what is something that you wish you could make?
Well, the one that got away was Narain Shankar and I co-wrote a stab at redoing the Wild Wild West from the 1960s.
Really?
I loved the Wild Wild West.
Me too.
The movie's unwatchable, but the show had an edge and a thing, and it was different. Yeah, they're sort of James Bond spies in the West, but they also were dealing with the occult and the macabre and the weird stuff that was happening. And I really liked that show, and it really was. Robert Conrad definitely had an edge and was a dangerous guy, and his friend, the Master of Disguise. And I really liked that show and wanted to do a new version of it. And I haven't been able to get my hands on it. I took one shot at it for CBS, and they just didn't know what we were talking about, and then just went back on the shelf. And so that's still the one that got away.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you see a way back to it?
There's definitely a way back to it, but now I don't work at a place that has the rights to it anymore. True. So I got to bide my time till I get another shot.
Right. What, I have so many questions. I'm going to go to here, Ron.
Go.
I'm going to go to here. Oh, this is a good one. If you could live in one of your project's realities, which one would you choose?
Oh, it's Star Trek. There's no question.
What would you have been?
I would have been trying to be a starship captain. I would have gone to the academy. I would have tried to. I wanted that. That's what I wanted. I wanted to boldly go places. I wanted to, be the leader of a ship of friends and colleagues that we were going out and doing these amazing things, and spreading peace, throughout the galaxy. But taking hard choices, but always being wise and having fun, and just that's absolutely the world I would live in.
Do you think growing up, like sort of, not idolizing, but sort of, with Roddenberry's idea of the future, like in your mind, do you think that you were sort of set up for disappointment? Did you want friendships like that? Did you think that that was real? Did you sort of, were you disappointed by people after that?
I think I wanted friends like that. I had friends like that. Friends like, rely on that trust you had a bond with. The world disappoints me, certainly. I didn't get the space program I thought I was going to get, which is why I created For All Mankind was, hey, where's the space program I thought I was getting when I was a kid? Where'd that go? Let's do a show about that ideal of the future, that optimistic view of the path we could have taken. So I got to do that, I'm not, this is what it could have been. As I grow older, I'm definitely disappointed that we don't, as a people and as a society, moving in a direction that I thought was somewhat inevitable with what I thought was progress and moving forward and, moving towards that place where we solve those problems and we do it in a spirit of brotherhood and we do it together, in good fellowship. And yeah, I am disappointed that that isn't part of my life, even though the optimist Trek did make me the eternal optimist. So I'm always the one looking for the glass half full of how this is all working. It's going to be okay. This is whatever's happening is a blip. The bigger eyes on the prize, it's still better than it was 100 years ago. We're still going to make it. It's still going to be okay. So I still have that at my core.
Is it hard when you're creating projects like that, though, to write opposing views, to put yourself in the shoes of someone you may not agree with and actually, make their claim or their fight?
No, that's the fun of it. That's the part I really like. I really like trying to sit in the devil's advocate position or trying to humanize the other point of view or the point of view I strongly disagree with to try to make that, is that the hero's journey of this particular story, the thing that I wouldn't do or I don't want to have happen. What if I could make it where we have sympathy for them? I'm always looking for a way to have sympathy for the opposing person in the drama, which was really informed a lot of Battlestar. When I take the Cylons from this place, and we're going to go in this other direction. By the end of it, we're going to look at them completely differently. And that was a deliberate choice we had at the outset. That's the trajectory that this is all going on. I want to set them up as genocidal, fundamentalist. There's nothing good about the Cylons. And then bit by bit, to start to question that and challenge that, and then start telling stories about the Cylons and really make you question your assumptions that you had in your head about them and about yourself and what you think is right and wrong, and that things are difficult. They're hard, not every answer is so easy to come to. And what if I changed things slightly? And what if the suicide bombers were the heroes? What if you were on that side of that equation? What's that like? So I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy part of turning the tables a bit and, challenging audiences sort of beliefs and expectations, and still entertaining them and still keeping them on the ride.
Have you ever, in sort of making the claim of the opposition in your own mind, have you ever changed your own beliefs?
I think I have. I'm trying to grab onto an example. I feel like I've gone through that. I feel especially sort of in terms of what I thought on a geopolitical level, I think I come from and came from a very Kennedy-esque, ask not belief system that feathered into Star Trek and America and sort of what it's about and what we're trying to do. And through these arguments and stories and characters starting to feel like, but maybe that's not right. But what if you're on the other side of that? What if you're on the other side of the, Rome? What if Rome is not the good guy?
Yeah.
And starting to really challenge those things and having a more nuanced feeling of maybe the things I thought were pretty rock solid, fundamental beliefs that I had about who we are as a people, what we stand for, why this is the right way to go, and feeling like maybe I shouldn't be so sure about a lot of those things that I thought were pretty bedrock. And I think that's mostly through story and argument and sitting in writers' rooms and then wrestling with it on the page. Once you start really putting yourself in that other chair, not just as a straw person that has an easy argument to knock down, but to really like say, no, how would you really argue this point? If you really believe this, then you start really trying to believe it as a writer. And then you start realizing, well, actually, this is a pretty valid way of looking at the world. Wait a minute.
You're like gaslighting yourself.
Yeah, you're like gaslighting yourself. Holy crap, how did I get here? So yeah, I've had that experience.
I've had similar experiences when I've played people that had different beliefs as myself, or would do something that I obviously wouldn't do in my own life. And, when you put yourself in their shoes and you start to identify with them and sympathize with them, and it's a very strange thing because it can actually change you or change me sometimes, like at my core. It's very odd to sort of play other people and play their perspective on life. It can change you for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and we do a bit of that, or at least I do. There's a bit of that involved in the writer's room and in writing on the page. You're acting out, sometimes literally in a writer's room, as I'm pitching scenes, I'm acting out the different parts and what they would say and trying to, arrange it in your head. And definitely on the page, I'm writing a character's voice, and I'm sometimes saying the lines out loud to hear them in my head. And that doesn't sound right, or that's too awkward. And trying to capture if it's a show that's going, trying to remember how Katee plays Starbuck, and would she say it like this? I'm trying to hear that, or Eddie or whatever. And you're in that other's shoes. So it's like, it's not acting per se, but it's a different form of acting as a writer to try to inhabit that character to then get the words right.
Mm-hmm. Were you when they wanted to remake Battlestar Galactica again, was that something you were excited about?
You mean after our show?
Yeah.
Oh, I certainly had mixed feelings about it. But, I didn't create it. I reinvented it. So who am I? Who am I to say you can't do that? And they approached me, and I went in and I talked, and for a minute in time, I went home like, wouldn't it be fun to do it again? And then I was like, what are you thinking? Are you insane? Talk about, there's no, what's the best you're going to get out of this? No. So walk away. Thank you. Leave them wanting more to the audience. Bring on the next group. Yeah. And it would come back periodically, or I'd get a call. We're doing it. We just wanted to check in with you. Are you okay with this? And I would always say, yeah. I mean, go with God. Sure. Absolutely. But I always had mixed feelings about it. Sure. It's hard not to, especially, when I was getting those calls like 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah. And I was like, God, the body's not even cold. I mean, what the hell? Like, really?
Give it till 20 like they did.
Are we doing it now? I mean, wow. All right. And then it didn't happen.
I know.
So, but yeah, I mean, I expect it will happen. Sure.
Some
it'll
point.
happen. It'll happen.
It should.
It should. Yes.
If somebody can see a way through it.
Somebody takes a crack at it. Why not?
Yeah.
Wish them well. Maybe it's a good show. It doesn't replace what we did. It doesn't supplant it. It's just somebody else did something else. That can be good too. That's fine.
What are you looking at doing next? Can you talk about what you're doing right now?
Oh, right now I'm working on an adaptation there's a video game called God of War. Mm-hmm. There's a big title in the gaming world that Amazon has ordered 2 seasons of, and they have asked me to come in. So I'm literally in the writer's room and, working on that. That's my new thing.
That's such a daunting property.
Yeah. And I'm not a gamer. So it's even more like, okay, I've never done this before.
Do you try to play the game?
I've tried. I'm not a gamer. I've taken a stab at it, but I don't have, I grew up in the arcade era. You'd go down, you'd put your quarters in and bang on the buttons. So I could do that. I'll play Defender. Got a Defender game or Asteroids? Sure. Bring it on, baby.
I was very good at Asteroids and Street Fighter.
Centipede.
Oh my God. I killed Centipede.
All that.
Oh my God.
But the controllers now, it's like
no, they have like buttons here and like,
press R1. Which one's R1? Oh, I'm dead.
Yeah.
I can't quite get over that moment of, meanwhile, my kids, of course, do it like it's nothing. My wife can do it.
Really?
Yeah. Terry plays Skyrim. She's a Skyrim fan. She's played that for probably 15 years.
Oh my God.
Loves it. Goes in because it's an open world game. And she likes going in. She goes and kills dragons to get money to build houses and cultivate crops and cook and build out. And then she runs out of money and it's like, oh, I guess I got to go kill some more dragons. And off she goes, So it's like a whole thing. She loves it.
Oh my God. Yeah. She's like a character to be written. That's hysterical.
Yeah, is that great?
That's like I'm just killing dragons so I can plant my garden.
Yeah, that's all she does.
That's absolutely hysterical. I mean, thank you. I have more, but this is long. That'll be part 2.
Okay.
That'll be part 2. Yeah.
I look forward to part 2.
Me too. This has been really wonderful.
Been fun. Thank you for having me.
I thank you for not telling me who Starbuck was.
If I'd given you an answer, we would have
I think that anything that you could have said wouldn't have been right.
Exactly.
Because to me, she's just always been something.
Yeah.
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 So I appreciate that.
Good.
But I'm going to start telling people that she's nothing. Sorry. What is she to you?
Yeah.
That's what I've always sort of said. Yeah. What is she to you?
I like
That's
that.
all that matters.
Sure. What do you think? Who is she?
Yeah.
What do you think happened after Cut to Black on Sopranos? There's no right answer to it. It's just left with the audience.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Katee? What the fuck?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around for the hindsight, but there isn't one. You're right. Yep, you heard that correctly. There is no hindsight because we're going to do an entire episode of a hindsight next Tuesday of this episode. And I'm bringing a special guest because who better to talk about Ron Moore than my friend, the woman you love, probably more than me, Trisha Halver and Jeff.
Perfect time for my cat to be there.
It's okay. The only thing that would have made it better is just the cat's asshole.
She's going to be in the whole show, so get used to it.
So come back next Tuesday. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Ron Moore. We will see you next Tuesday, and that's what's up.